Hey everybody, welcome back to Dental Unfiltered. I'm Matt Brown. We're here with our normal co-host, Dr. Andrew Vallo, and this is a really good episode. I'm really excited about because both of us go through this. Seasons of an entrepreneur. There's a lot of phases of entrepreneur life, from startup to beginner to the hard phase to the medium phase with starting to delegate responsibility and growing through that to like a critical mass phase where you start to really benefit from the fruits of your first two seasons labors. And that's at least my point of view. Dr. Vallo came up with this, and he really wanted to talk about seasons of an entrepreneur. And all of you that are listeners, aside from me and Dennis, you are also entrepreneurs. So, Dr. Vallo, seasons of an entrepreneur. Tell me kind of what brought this up and what motivated you to do it, and tell me your view on it.
I think this is something that is talked about from time to time, and I've heard other people like Mark Costas talk about this too. But I thought this would be good because I'm entering another new season here, and I feel like I was talking to Matt recently, guys, and just talking about it, like how things change as a business owner, with growth of the business and growth of the family, and different roles you can have in the business. And my life definitely looks a lot different now than it did a few years ago, even than it did, 6 months ago, to be quite frank. Uh, and the other thing that kind of brought this up was, there was recently a post on Dental Investment Group talking about, hey, sometimes I stop and think about, I think the post was like, sometimes I stop and think about like our desire to scale, and, like, is it worth it? Is it worth it chasing, bigger numbers, multiple practices, big exit? If you're just adding more stress and taking away time from your family, like, what is it all for? Kind of like one of those like deep meaning type of a post. Um, and I commented on it, and I said, very simply put, I get to spend more time with my family now as the owner of an 11 dental practice group than I ever did as the owner of a single practice. And like, there was no bullshit there. Like that's 100% true. And I mean, like, to be fair, it's because I've scaled intentionally, and because I've built a great team around me that's allowed me to do that. But my point is, you can have both. Like, just because you're scaling and growing a business and maturing as an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have to keep giving up more and more of your scarce resource of your time with your family. I think there is a way to have some balance there. I think a lot of people talk about like, oh, like there's no such thing as work-life balance. I really think there is, but I think it takes some time to get there. I think you have to have some patience with it, and you've got to be intentional. And I think honestly, you've got to take some risks to get there. If I was risk adverse this whole time, if I avoided risk, there's no way that I would be where I'm at, and there's no way I would have the flexibility that I have. And don't get me wrong, guys, it's not that, I mean, we're opening 4 practices in like 2.5 months. It's not like I don't work. I mean, if you ask my wife, she'll still tell you I work too much, but I work a lot less than I used to, and I think I've been heading in the right direction there. So yeah, I think this will be a cool episode. And I guess like kind of my plan was I would kind of touch on like what my life was like at different points of my, dental entrepreneur journey. Starting back to when I was first opening my first startup. So that was a pretty crazy time. So that was like right around COVID. I found my space for my first practice right around COVID, right around March of 2020. And we had to wait a couple months to sign the lease because everything basically shut down, for a couple months. And we signed the lease in June of 2020, and it took 10 months to get open, April of 2021. And that was a busy time because I was still working pretty much full time as an associate dentist, and I was trying to figure out all the stuff that went into opening. I was working with Ideal Practices, so like they helped save me from a lot of mistakes. They helped save me a lot of money. It was a great experience, but I mean, they don't just sit there and do all the work for you. You still have to put in the work. So I was putting in all the work I could to, one, learn everything I could that I didn't already learn from podcasts. I was consuming podcasts at an, insane rate during those times. Like any free moment I could, I was listening to dental podcasts. I was reading dental books. I was in dental Facebook groups. I was trying to research different things and making of a dental startup and dental nachos and, any of the business of dentistry. I was taking notes. So I mean, I was working a ton just to try to get my practice open. I mean, and it's exciting, but it's also stressful because you've never done it before, and there's kind of that unknown factor that comes into it. I will say it was probably helpful to me at that time that I didn't have kids yet. I wasn't even married yet. We were engaged. My wife and I now, but I think I had a lot more free time. And something for all you guys that don't have kids yet and want to have kids someday, I will tell you. I know it's cliche, but like, man, you think you don't have time before you have kids, and then you have kids, and you realize what it really means to not have time. Anyways, like kind of a crazy time, but it was exciting. I started tapering back on my associate job. I think I went back to like 2 days a week, a few months before my practice opened, which was it was a good mix. I felt comfortable. I still had some money coming in, but I had a couple extra days to work on getting everything ready to open my practice. And then the original plan was for me to keep working 1 to 2 days a week as an associate after I opened. And I very quickly realized, as I was about to open my first startup, that I needed my full undivided attention on my new business. So, and fortunately, my associate job I tried to work with them the entire time on timing, and they were really cool about it. And I fortunately found my own replacement who was great. And so they were really happy with me for that. So I basically went to them. I was like, listen, I know I told you I wanted to keep working 1 or 2 days a week. I can't do it. And they were very understanding about it. And so I basically more or less quit on the spot. And my replacement, picked up my slack there, and, everything was fine. But that was huge because I think that was about a week before I opened my practice. So literally the day I opened my door, I was not working an associate job. Originally, at the very beginning, we were only open 3 days a week. But I was giving my full attention 100% to getting that practice off the ground as quickly as possible. I've told this story before on here, but I use Wells Fargo for my first business loan, and they make you have a phone call with their dental consultant who, is a nice guy. I don't want to throw him shade, but unfortunately was giving that peanut gallery canned advice that I think unfortunately a lot of startup dentists listen to, and it stunts their growth.
It's industry standard thinking, and if you want to be industry standard average, that's the crap you listen to.
Well, yeah, and he's telling me, he's like, hey, just keep in mind, the average startup dental practice only collects $236,000 in their first year open. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to collect over $1 million in my first year. And he's like, oh, yeah. He's like, let me know when you do. I'll send you a bottle of scotch. I'm still waiting on that bottle. We collected, I think, 1.2 in our first year open with the first startup. But anyways, he's telling me things like, you can't hire a hygienist from day one. You can't afford that. And I was like, I can't afford not to. And I was like, I appreciate your advice. I'm just letting you know, I'm not listening to any of it. I am the salmon swimming upstream. I've got bigger goals, bigger dreams. I'm going to make it happen. And so I did, man. I was so intentional from day one to get as many people in the door, to, get as much dentistry going as possible. My entire life basically surrounded around that dental office. Once again, still not married, still no kids. We got married shortly after. So we opened in April of 21. We got married in Mexico in July of 21. We did our honeymoon over Christmas in December of 21. But generally speaking, that year, I honestly was working 80 to 100 hours a week because I was seeing patients at least 3 days a week. And I was every waking moment was focused on what can I do to grow my dental practice as quickly as possible, take it to the next level. And then, as many of you know, that's when I partnered with Sasha and we opened our first implant office about 8 months later. So, before the end of 21, I got my second practice open. So at that point in time, I didn't have an office manager at my main practice. My second practice, my brother who had just moved to town became the office. He had no dental experience, but he became my office manager of the second practice. But I was still super involved in the day-to-day operations of both practices, all of the marketing stuff, all the payroll I was essentially doing myself, all of any systems we were setting up, any meetings I was holding, any staff issues I was dealing with, discipline I was dealing with, patient issues I was dealing with. It's that E-Myth book, man. I was wearing every single friggin' hat. And it was exhausting. Again, it was exciting because both businesses were growing quickly, but it was exhausting. And once again, man, I don't know how the hell I would have done it if I had kids at that point in time. And I know people do. And like, you guys are superheroes to me because, at that point, having no help and trying to like very quickly grow to startup businesses while also being the main producer, the only producer at that time at, my flagship office, it was crazy. It was insane. Guys, I paid my dues, so, again, for those of you who might listen to me now and think like, man, you've got 11 offices, but you've got this executive team and you're saying you're working less and you haven't seen patients in 18 months. And, like, that sounds great. Like, I would love to, be where you're at right now. Just realize, guys, like, I didn't just like wake up in this role that I'm in today. I like put my nose to the grindstone, man. And I just freaking gritted it out for years. I mean, it was fast growth. I mean, don't get me wrong. To grow a group from zero to, again, we're shooting for 30 million in 2026 in 5 years. I mean, like, yes, very quick. And I don't like that fact is not lost on me. But like the first couple of years, it was all grind and hustle, man. It was whatever I needed to do, I was going to get done. We then found offices number 3 and 4, which were kind of ground up construction. And those opened in January of 24. But, so in the meantime, but before all that happened, we had my first son we had our first child, my son, Rhett, in December of 22. So about a year before offices 3 and 4 opened. So at that time, I was still working pretty much full time. I think I was still 3 days a week when we had my son. And I think we had just kind of found these offices 3 and 4. They were ground up construction. So I think maybe like process was like paperwork was just signed. Things were just kind of getting started there. But there wasn't a whole lot to do for that yet because we had to wait for them to be built. But I did have an office manager for both offices at that point. My brother actually transitioned out. So at that point he transitioned out. He eventually became my executive assistant. I think he was still an office manager role at that time. But we eventually, he realized he didn't like the management side. But had an office manager at both offices. I was still working kind of full time, but I did have an associate at my flagship office. So I had some help in there. So that was nice. I will tell you what, guys, if you are a solo practice owner and you're thinking about having a kid or you're going to have a kid, I gave this advice to one of my friends who's a dentist, who's a solo practice owner. I said, man, if you can get an associate in there before you have your kid, it just makes life so much easier. Rhett was born on December 8th, 2022. And I took off essentially the entire month of December. I think I worked like the first couple of days of December, and then I took off, a couple of days before, my wife was supposed to be induced for labor. And I took off the rest of the month so that I could be home and, spend the holidays and all that stuff. And my associate covered all that, which, sounds great on paper, but it ended up being like even more important than I had realized. And this is a story I don't think I've really told on here before, but, like many people deal with, we had some issues during my son's birth. So my wife was in labor for about 48 hours before they eventually decided to do an emergency C-section. Essentially he was stuck. He wasn't coming out on his own. So they did the emergency C-section. There were some concerns, after the C-section. They took him up to the NICU. He was in the NICU for 8 days, which again, count my blessings because I've met so many people and know people who have had months long stays in NICU. And I can only imagine because those 8 days felt like an eternity, man. Having to go in and visit him and stuff. He had, he was put on this, which I had never even heard of before, but he was put on this cooling treatment for 48 or 72 hours. Anyways, basically they cooled his core body temperature. They were concerned about some trauma during the birthing process. No one could ever give us any answers. I have no idea what actually, no one, I think at this point really knows what happened, but they were concerned there may have been trauma. They wanted to cool his core body temperature down to prevent inflammation that, could lead to potential, brain damage issues. And like, thank God I had an associate. It's like, basically, thank God I had an office manager. Thank God I had an associate, because that was like a couple weeks span where I basically paid almost zero attention to my business. And it kept running without me there. And I think honestly, guys, like in hindsight, that was kind of my first taste of like, man, maybe I can be a business owner without actually having to be involved in every aspect of the business. Because my business didn't fall apart when I essentially took almost a full month off. And like not only was I not in the practice, but I wasn't really like working on things behind the scenes. I wasn't really talking to people behind the scenes. I mean, I was so into the situation of my life and my family at that point that I basically like, it's like the practice didn't even matter anymore. So, long story short, fortunately, our son made a full recovery. We had a bunch of doctor visits in, the first few months, the specialists, neurologists, and cardiologists. He had, a small hole, very common hole in his heart that closed. Physical therapy. He's now 3.5 years old, and he is thriving, and he's absolutely wild, crazy, running, jumping, whatever. So whether there was truly an issue during the birthing process or not, thankfully, whatever happened, I think someone was looking out for us, someone was looking out for him, and everything went well there. But my point of telling that story is like that was a serious season of being an entrepreneur. That was the first time I was faced with a major, personal life crisis while being a business owner. And I didn't have like obviously like the executive team I have now. I basically from that point on doubled down on building a true business that could not only survive but thrive with as little input from me as possible. And I think that was a defining moment. Like that was some clarity for me in that, God, if anything like this ever happens again, because I said before that, like at that point, the business didn't matter. I mean, it still did. I mean, it was still our livelihood. It was still new enough that, it's not like we were sitting on a big savings account or anything like that. We still kind of needed it to survive. But I'm saying like there was that short period where like there was something that was more important than it. Like it felt like for the first time. So anyways, let's fast forward a little bit. We get the next 2 practices open. We've got, office managers at every single practice there. I'm a new dad. So I'm trying to work less. I think I cut down to 2 days a week and then actually brought in a second associate at my flagship practice, which allowed me to cut back to 1 day a week, which I did for a short period of time. That was kind of my ugly duckling CEO phase. That was when I first kind of had a true business where I had 4 different offices. We're starting to see some serious revenue growth across the board. I was cutting back clinically, but I was still in the chair. But I was like also starting to do more CEO stuff, more like big picture planning and analysis and, big picture system things. But like I wasn't fully in. I still was like half in the dental chair, half in that CEO role. And honestly, that was one of the more miserable times for me as a business owner. I liked it early on when I was like really a dentist, but then like I was also kind of the manager and kind of this or whatever. And I've really enjoyed being a CEO, which I'll get into, in a minute. But like that time where like I was unsure of my identity. like part of me was still a clinical dentist. I still had to see, and like I was doing bigger cases at that point. Like I was doing a lot of cosmetic cases. I was doing a lot of very complex Invisalign cases because that was like my jam. I was doing some, full mouth rehabs where I was opening VDOs. So like I had really gotten into kind of like the peak of, I never got into like big surgery implant stuff. I've never placed an implant, even though I own a bunch of implant offices and all my offices place a bunch of implants. I think we were going to place like 5,000 or 6,000 implants this year. But I would kind of hit the peak of my clinical career doing some of my most advanced cases, which you guys know can be stressful. I mean, you've got high expectation patients. You've got big transformations you're doing. I'm only in the office 1 or 2 days a week. I'm dealing with patient problems as I'm coming in there. I had office managers, but they weren't truly empowered yet, and I didn't have anyone between the office managers and myself at that point in time. I was kind of miserable. I really did not like going in the office because I felt like every time I was in the office, even if I was doing a big cosmetic case, I was bringing in big production for the practice, I felt like my time would have been better spent sitting at my computer being CEO. And I felt like I couldn't give my patients my undivided attention because always in my head I was thinking about, now I've got 4 practices, I've got multiple associates, I got all this stuff going on. So I needed to rip the Band-Aid off. And I finally did in November of 2024 when I got out of the chair completely. And I have not gone back since. So, it's been a little bit over 18 months. I have not seen any patients during that time. And that's when that was the next season of my life when I transitioned fully into CEO. And at that time, I was still working a lot. I was still probably putting in 65 to 80 hours a week. It was no patient care. It was all, how can I grow my group? How can I grow our revenue? How can I grow our leadership team? How can I grow our EBITDA? And at that point, we were preparing to add 6 new offices in 6 months. So between beginning of December of 24 and July of 25, we added 6 new offices. That year, so 2024, we did 8.9 million in revenue, which was almost double what we did the year before. We did, I think, 4.7 the year before. So to me, that was a huge add. Almost double our revenue. But 2025, we added $10 million in revenue. We went from 8.9 to $19 million in 1 year. That wouldn't have happened if I didn't get my ass out of the dental chair. It's like that needed to that was my next progression as an entrepreneur. That was the next progression for my business. Because even though you think like, man, it's only 1 or 2 days a week that you're in the chair, or even it's only 1 day a week that you're in the chair, guys, we only have so much bandwidth. So even if you like count the number of hours I'm in the chair, you're not thinking about like where my mind's at. And so, I talked about being in the chair and thinking about all the CEO stuff I need to do. Well, the flip side was happening too, man. I was sitting in my CEO chair and I was thinking about that big cosmetic case where we just couldn't quite get the shade where the patient wanted it, or, I was getting an email from the lab about this margin, or, whatever it was, man. So it's like, I couldn't ever just be CEO and I couldn't ever just be dentist. It was always in this mixed state, and it was like killing my bandwidth. I fully believe we would not have had that much success when we opened those 6 new practices if I had not gotten myself out of the dental chair completely. So, and I know other dentists that have recently gone through this transition. I'm telling you guys, if you love clinical dentistry, this is not me telling you to stop doing clinical dentistry. If you love clinical dentistry and you want to be a clinical dentist, more power to you. Keep doing that. But if you love being an entrepreneur and you really want to scale your dental group, you have to get out of the chair, and sooner than later. Like, don't set some 10-year plan or 7-year plan or 5-year plan. Figure out how you can get yourself out of the dental chair this year. It's going to make all the difference as far as your ability to grow your group. Or if you're not going to do that, man, hire a real CEO, like a real one. Like, go pay someone hundreds of thousands of dollars to be the CEO of your dental group. If you don't want to be in that role, someone needs to be in that role. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to scale like the way that we've scaled here. So that was the next season, man. And again, like, there was still a little bit of identity. So like, I was going through the identity crisis when I was like part-time dentist, part-time CEO. I was going through a whole new identity crisis when I was no longer a clinical dentist and I was full-time CEO. So it took a little bit to get used to that, but I really got in the groove and I really enjoyed it. And that's when I really focused on growing our leadership team. So not only did we add 10 million in revenue in 2025, but we also, I mean, our executive team went from almost nothing to essentially what it is today. So I mean, we added, chief operating officer, Manny, my right hand man, who he took over the crazy work that I was doing. I mean, he took over those 80+ hour work weeks. And he's just, I mean, he is so devoted to doing whatever it takes to help our group grow. It's incredible. We brought on our CFO, my father, he's part-time CFO, about 25 hours a week, but he's been a huge help, for us as well. We brought on chief sales officer, our best treatment coordinator transitioned into that role. And she has done wonders for our sales department, our treatment coordinator department. We brought on our chief hygiene officer. We brought on our first regional manager. We just recently added our second regional manager. So now we've got a regional manager for the Tampa offices, one for the South. My business partner became more involved in the group and became our chief dental officer. We also, one of our associates, we promoted. He's still a full-time associate, but he also kind of took on a fractional role as our director of doctor relations and development. We've got a couple executive assistants, one for myself and one for our COO. We added a talent acquisition specialist, so basically a hiring manager. So, I mean, it has just been incredible growth of our executive team. And that, the growth of our leadership team is what has allowed me to finally take a little bit of a step back from the day-to-day. So, again, guys, I'm still working a lot, especially for, father of two young kids. I mean, our daughter is just about to turn 2 months here in a few days, early July 7th, she'll be 2 months old. So I'm still working a lot, but like, I don't work a lot on the weekends anymore. I mean, there's some things that have to get done, but like generally speaking, the weekends are for my family, which is something new for me because for the last 5 years, basically, I worked weekends. I mean, I had to, things had to get done. I drop my son off at school. He goes it's daycare, school, whatever you want to call it. He's 3.5, but he goes Monday, Wednesday, Friday. My wife used to take him and pick him up. Now I drop him off Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I pick him up, which means I can't get to the office and start my work day until a certain time, and I can't, and I have to leave. I mean, I have to, no matter what. I've had to cut meetings short that were running long. I've had to stop in the middle of doing stuff because I got to get there to pick them up from school. I mean, I have to. I have that responsibility. Every morning I get up and feed our daughter. I get her up and feed her. I get our son up and get him breakfast and stuff. And most days I get to the gym early. 5 a.m. Come home, get our daughter up around 6:37. Get my son up around 8. So I really have found way more balance as a father, as a family man, and as a business owner. I'm probably putting in a more typical 40 to 50 hour work week most weeks, I would say, for the first time since I went to open my first practice 5 years ago. So I spent 5 years working a lot, and now I'm still working. I would, again, a full-time role, but it's a new season for me. And I'll tell you what, I'm thankful for it. Like there are times where in my head I think like, man, I could be doing this, which could be growing my business more. But at the same time, it comes back to that question of like, so what is the point of that? If I wasn't willing to find that balance and I wasn't willing to spend time with my kids and take some of the burden off my wife, again, we've grown like crazy. Does it really make a difference if we do 28 million or 32 million this year? I don't think it does. And I think that's kind of a new realization for me. I think I was so driven to hit certain goals, hit certain quotas, hit certain growth metrics, take things to the next, like to me, that was kind of all that mattered for a while. Because I'm very competitive, and so like and mainly with myself. Like I always want to prove to myself that I can take things to the next level. But I think I really have entered kind of this new season where I've realized I've built this machine filled with these incredible people that is essentially self-sufficient. It is self-running, and it runs very well. And if I don't have to put as much input in myself, that's really not a bad thing. So I think I'm going to enjoy this latest season more than I have any of the previous seasons that I've had.
I think I've just kind of hit that season too. Like we're 6 years into Energize, and we're a year into Zero, which has been really exciting. And Dental Unfiltered is doing its thing, and Chief Revenue Officer of all three elements. I have a lot more time for my family at night. My wife says the same thing. She says, you work too much. And it's just not really like I'm working less, but it just doesn't feel that way because I think entrepreneurs, we just work more than the average guy. But if you want the benefit of what we can do in our lives and what we can do for our families, you're going to work a lot. So, hey guys, thanks so much for joining us. Please like, subscribe, share, and follow. And please leave a review. We read them and we love them. Thank you guys and have a great day.